Hello, dear friends. Today we continue our acquaintance with the memoirs of Waffen SS Major General Kurt Meyer. Don't forget to rate the video and leave your opinion about this material. Well, let's begin. Then we moved through hilly terrain. A few kilometers ahead was the small Berda River, which flowed south into the Sea of Azov near Berdansk. If the Soviet troops were going to retreat in an orderly manner, they had to hold the western bank of this river and engage our forces in battle here, delaying our advance so that the retreating troops could be directed to organize defenses on the Meuse River line, or even as far as the Don. The Russians had to fight for time and space, and we had to prevent them from doing so. Their units and formations, pressed by us, had to be destroyed before they could consolidate their positions. The mobility of German units and formations was supposed to ensure their victory. The Germans could no longer be allowed to get bogged down in long, protracted battles. At the same time, if we calculated our losses, it became clear that the combat capability of our troops was already below critical levels. None of the units were fully manned, and each of them could only deploy the remnants of their former combat power. Even the most junior soldier knew that we had to use the crossing near the village of Novospasovka, rushing across it at full speed and, most importantly, preventing the bridge from being blown up. Once again, everything was decided in a matter of minutes. The vanguard platoon of the 1st Company of the 1st SS Reconnaissance Battalion rounded a low hill and saw the village of Novospasovka below. The village is located in a lowland. The riverbed had washed away the banks, which were almost vertical. A modern concrete bridge was built across the river. Horses waded across the river and struggled to climb up the opposite bank. The entire lowland was swollen with retreating people, carts, and equipment. But to our right, along the heights, the defeated Soviet units were retreating eastward and further across the bridge, or trying to ford the river to ease the load on the bridge. It was assumed that the 1st Company of the 1st SS Reconnaissance Battalion, taking advantage of the enemy's confusion, would take the bridge with a surprise attack. From the middle of our column, motorcyclists, armored vehicles, and tank destroyers rushed down the smooth slope in a wide front, roaring into the very center of the Russian troops. The fleeing Soviet troops did not even think of resistance. In wild panic, they rushed down the slope into the riverbed. Horse-drawn artillery, army supply vehicles, and infantry formed a chaotic throng. Horses stood in the water, unable to climb onto the opposite bank. More and more people crossed the river to avoid capture, but they were running to their deaths. Countless barrels fired shells and bullets, sowing death among the fleeing masses. It was already impossible to control the retreating troops. People ran in panic, saving their lives. The 1st Company of the 1st SS Reconnaissance Battalion broke into this chaos, and firing from all barrels, rushed towards the bridge. Several armored vehicles cleared the bridge with fire from above. Only the dead and dying remained lying on it. Suddenly, I saw the 1st platoon rush forward as if bitten by a tarantula. They jumped over the barrier, leaped off their still-moving vehicles, and eliminated the crew of a Russian heavy anti-tank gun. The gun had already taken up a firing position. A few more seconds, and the crossing would have become a bloodbath for us, too. With fire support from the 2nd Company of the 1st Reconnaissance Battalion and armored vehicles on the hill, the 1st Company of the 1st SS Reconnaissance Battalion attacked at speed and was soon on the eastern edge of the village. I moved forward with the company along the main street of the village and struggled with my doubts. Should we continue the offensive on Mariupol or not? In view of the rapid retreat of the Russians, the situation required us to move on to Mariupol, trying to push large forces of Russian troops to the coast of the Sea of Azov. The retreat was taking place in a southeasterly direction, i.e., towards Mariupol. Why then should we waste precious time capturing Berdansk? The city would inevitably fall when Mariupol, located further east, fell. I stood with a few soldiers, poring over the map. We were behind the last houses, intending to go out behind the windbreak forest strip that prevented us from seeing the terrain ahead. Franz Roth, a war correspondent, was with us when he suddenly cried out as if stung. He pushed me behind the strip, and not very politely. Franz couldn't say a word and was literally beside himself. He wanted to start filming everything that was happening with his movie camera. No more than 20 paces ahead was a monstrous Russian tank which seemed ready to move or open fire at any second. The street emptied in the blink of an eye. SS Untersturmführer Bergmann grabbed the explosives and made his way under fire cover through a small orchard to blow up the tank. We followed this man, holding our breath. The tank did not move. Its engine was silent. Perhaps this monster had mechanical problems. Bergman prepared to throw, took a deep breath, and rushed toward the tank. At any moment, the explosives could fly onto the rear of the vehicle, disabling the engine in the next second. It could happen at any moment. A shot broke the silence. I saw Bergman fall and the explosive land in the sand a few meters from the tank. A pistol shot from the tank proved fatal for our comrade. There was an explosion, but the Russian tank remained intact. After that, an assault gun took up position and fired shell after shell at the steel giant from a distance of no more than 25 meters. Nothing happened. The shells did not penetrate the armor. The Russians seemed invulnerable. The gun commander, Izek, shook his head in resignation and cursed elaborately. His gun had met a worthy opponent. Previously, we had managed to destroy the first T-34s we had encountered, mainly with the help of incendiary mixtures from backpack flamethrowers or shots from heavy anti-aircraft guns. During a combat encounter with a T-34, I was standing in the garden of a small house with several soldiers and climbed onto a small hill to get a better view. The hill was obviously a potato storage cellar. We stood on the hill for a while when suddenly my faithful dog Pat rushed furiously into a hole. The dog had discovered more than a dozen Russians in the cellar. We looked at each other in confusion. And then the Russians climbed out of their hiding place with hand grenades, automatic weapons, and other weapons. Once again, we were convinced that a soldier in war needs a lot of luck to stay alive. My intention to continue pursuing the enemy to Mariupol was impossible to carry out at that moment, as an order to capture Berdansk was transmitted by radio. Once again, the 1st Company of the 1st SS Reconnaissance Battalion went ahead and, crossing the hills, reached the Sea of Azov. Several Russian batteries were captured by surprise attack and disarmed without a single shot being fired. A cold wind whistled overhead, and a reconnaissance plane flew over the column and dropped a message attached to a smoke flare in front of the armored vehicles. The message read, "There are only insignificant forces in the city. The enemy column is 10 kilometers west of Berdansk. Several more enemy columns are moving parallel to each other in the direction of Mariupol, east of Berdansk." I received the message 8 kilometers north of Berdansk. The cold, hunger, and fatigue were forgotten. The enemy had to be destroyed while they were still west of Berdansk. They could not be allowed to reach the city before us. A few words to Peter were enough to make our light armored vehicle race past the company column like a race car. Clouds of dust hung behind us, and ahead we could already see the shimmering surface of the sea. Gerd Bremer and the advance units received the order, "Follow me." The city was indistinguishable from the north. It was located right on the shore under steep cliffs. Peter braked as soon as we spotted the airfield, from which the last plane had just taken off and flown east. We cautiously approached the first city houses. The motorcycle detachment was moving ahead. The street seemed completely deserted. There was not a soul in sight. Potholes and a broken road forced the motorcyclists to drive slowly. I signaled Peter to overtake them and cross the city as quickly as possible. At that moment, our car took the lead in the column and soon pulled ahead by more than 100 meters. We delved deeper into this ghost city. The intersections attracted us like a magnet. The nose of the armored vehicle peeked around the corner and sniffed out the situation on the street. Then our car made a quick dash and stopped at the next corner. So we moved from one street to another, setting the pace for the motorcyclists. Standing on the running board, I hid behind the tower and held my carbine with a death grip while Peter prepared to drive the vehicle to the next corner. There was no sound. All the windows were tightly closed, and there was not the slightest movement. Before the armored car disappeared around the corner, I looked back to see if the motorcyclists were following us. Suddenly, the armored car jerked backward, and I was lying on my side right on the street. Bullets whistled overhead. Horses reared up and galloped down the street. Firing indiscriminately, the Cossacks dismounted and rushed to the nearest houses. Their commander pulled out his revolver and opened fire. At that very moment, I heard Peter's voice behind me. "Sturmbannführer, I've already taken him out." He was right. The revolver fell onto the road. The horses without riders galloped west, and the wounded Cossacks leaned against the walls of the houses. That's all for today. If you liked the video, please support it with a like and subscribe to the channel. Bye for now. See you next time.